Welcome and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. For those of you who don't know me, and I see some familiar names and others not, my name is Jeff Kubiak. I'm a professor of practice at ASU, where I serve as the Director of Future Security Education in ASU's Future Security Initiative. The educational offerings I help guide include the MA in Global Security, or the MAGS, which has a non-technical concentration in cybersecurity and a brand new concentration in irregular warfare. We also offer a graduate certificate in Global Security and Competitive Statecraft. And we're building a new portfolio of short courses on similar topics to be offered at ASU's Career and Professional Development educational outlet called Career Catalyst. Today's event is one in a series of events we run each fall and spring semesters to highlight the thought-provoking security practitioner faculty that teach in our programs. Tonight's event, however, is slightly different in that instead of a faculty member, our guest speaker is a new member of the FSI network whose previous work would be of great interest to the MAGS community. So we're very honored to have him here tonight. Tonight's speaker is retired Italian Army Brigadier General Mario Greco. General Greco is a seasoned leader with a distinguished record of excellence across the spectrum of the conflict. General Greco has almost 30 years in uniform and has served in multinational forces in places like Somalia, UNSOM in 1993, both S4 in 1998 and KFOR in 2000 in NATO operations in the Balkans, and did several tours in Afghanistan with ISAF. On the NATO staff, he conducted strategic analysis, planning, and policy synchronization across the international military staff. He's addressed defense and security policy related issues in the military dimension of the alliance, dealing with the challenges, threats, and risks from the NATO strategic directions. His talk tonight is titled Why Integrating Strategic Foresight, Comparative Net Assessment, Policy Planning, and Capability Development is Crucial in Times of Harsh Geostrategic Confrontation. While the title is long and kind of a mouthful, I know that the ideas are very well tied together in General Greco's talk. So after he does a short presentation, I'll moderate a question and answer session. Feel free at any point in time in the discussion to submit a question in the question and answer block, and I'll do my best to get the question asked during our Q&A session at the end. And with that, General Greco, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. I will start by sharing my my desktop. Just give me a second. So I think that you are seeing my screen, and with that, I'd like to say good afternoon or good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me today. I'm really grateful to Arizona State University, and in particular to Professor Jeff Kubiak. Thank you, Jeff, for this opportunity to share my thoughts and reflection on a very long title or matter of interest: why integrating strategic foresight, comparative assessment, policy planning, and capability development is so essential in times of our strategic competition, particularly at the political military level in international organizations. Before starting my conversation, I would also like to thank Dr. Alicia Ellis, who has facilitated and supported my presence here today. So thank you, Alicia. Very nice of you. And finally, a very important thing, let me really underline that the contents of my presentation reflect my opinion and do not represent the official position of NATO or any other international organization or institution I have worked for during my professional career. As a former NATO senior military official, I will be very glad to share a personal perspective regarding how these matters should interrelate in any decision-making process. I will build on what I have observed during my tenure in NATO political military environment, considering that such a tenure lasted until the start of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, so 2022. And I will try to explain why, in an era of intense geopolitical competition and polarization, combining strategic anticipatory thinking, comparative assessment with policy planning, strategy, and finally capability development is imperative to achieve strategic prevalence, dominance, and particularly in the case of NATO, strategic deterrence. In my view, these four pillars really represent a critical area of my personal professional interest and background. And I found them incredibly appealing and thought-provoking, particularly during the last decade and in so turbulent and uncertain times. So considering the opportunity to integrate two forward-thinking disciplines, net assessment and strategic foresight, with policy planning and capability development to compete and succeed in the global strategic competition with 2050 on the horizon is crucial in my view. So I would say, just to introduce our conversation, I would say that such a comprehensive approach is crucial in extreme geostrategic competition and political polarization conditions. So in times of strategic volatility and uncertainty, organizations, be them private, public, or international, perceive amplified the necessity to anticipate, assess, plan, and prepare holistically and coordinatedly for complex and rapidly evolving changes in a very fluid strategic environment. The complexity of modern global strategic confrontation, which involves great power rivalries, hybrid warfare, and non-state actors' malign activities, necessitate, of course, a comprehensive, long-term, creative thinking. And this approach consents to imagining future scenarios, realistically assessing current challenges, flexibly planning policies and strategies, and identifying and then creating new capabilities which are necessary to achieve strategic prevalence and dominance, as I said before during the previous slide. So such integration is fundamental. And in an international political military alliance such as NATO, given the unique challenges and risks and threats of operating in a multilateral framework, and in particular, in light of the fact that the alliance is composed of 32 different countries with, of course, different strategic interests, which sometimes are colliding, and different political visions, is absolutely necessary. So, in a nutshell, I think that the integration it's a sort of comprehensive synthesis of disciplines and mindset that intellectually engage the future, enhance strategic anticipatory thinking, support cross-sectoral policy planning, and acts as an early warning system for crisis, and ultimately to strengthen leadership, strategic decision-making processes, and ability to think forward. Looking at the strategic scene, I would say that there are at least 4 or 5 elements that we need to consider when we try to describe the modern strategic scene setting. A thundery outlook characterized by events occurring at the hyper velocity. All humankind is experiencing an unprecedented period of extremism, globalization, divergent strategic political objectives, and hyper-technology developments, which exacerbate political differences and acute social economic disparities, and finally feeding more profound differences and polarization. On top of that, or in parallel, significant disagreements across various human domains have emerged as polycrises due to multiple and diverse interconnected causes. So we are witnessing a global strategic turbulence, multipolarity, uncertainty, and social political polarization rather than multilateralism. And this is the thundery strategic outlook. Regarding the unpreparedness for the unknown and the fear of uncertainties, these conditions warrant careful consideration in managing and mitigating the impacts on any organization, including a political alliance such as NATO. I can testify that unseen events or circumstances, including strategic surprises and wildcards, are really potential sources of disruptions and can unsettle the existing global order as we have observed in the last decade, and pose enormous challenges to decision-making processes which are reactive in nature. The decision-making process within NATO is a classical example. And my wishful thinking here, if I can say so, is that looking at the future in condition of strategic complexity and uncertainty, with an approach of being creative and out-of-the-box thinking, may spark and hope and more enthusiasm for the future itself. The third element is the highly process-oriented daily workload and routine. This is important for organizations. I think this is important also for governmental agencies. And I would say that this way of operating is a matter of fact and is still effective. But in my view and in my experience, often hampers flexibility and adaptability, which are vital to dealing with the current strategic challenges. For example, since its establishment in April 1949, NATO's decision-making process has been consensus-based. So all members must unanimously agree on any decision, document, paper, assessment. While promoting unity, this approach, while promoting unity, I would say also stifle independent thinking, which is, in my view, officially non-existent at NATO. And this is also undermines the growth of an independent, creative, and forward-looking mindset, which could inspire ideas, new approaches, and foster the sense of hope and innovation. And I'm sure that this kind of weakness is common within several institutions and enterprises, both public and private. Then I offer you a consideration about decision makers' anxiety and uncertainty. Well, decision makers are experiencing anxiety and uncertainty due to the increasing complexity and volatility of geopolitical and strategic landscapes. So while leaders, including at NATO, prefer concise communication and brief updates due to demanding daily schedule, they should reorganize the need and recognize the need for a deeper understanding of complex geopolitical interrelationships in the globalized world. Instead, they have superficial approaches driven by time constraints, and this kind of attitude may overlook critical factors and result in the adoption of ineffective strategies. Therefore, a more comprehensive approach to strategic planning is essential and also has the power to reassure senior leaders because they are more cognizant, they are more into the process, and they have more knowledge, more strategic knowledge about what is happening around. As a personal contribution to this conversation, and in light of my experience, I can testify that even a scheduled scenario-based discussion often fails under the red pen, falls victim of the red pen, if I may say so. Why? Because discussing a situation based on report or verified intelligence or very consolidated staff analysis is a very familiar undertaking for any leadership. Instead, dealing with future scenarios that may or might arise from particular geopolitical or economic situation is an open-ended situation and very provocatory and creates discomfort. So when a bureaucratic decision maker must choose between a predictable exchange of well-known positions and an open-ended debate, well, it's clear what they will prefer. This slide, I call it the environment, but I'm just trying to depict a little bit how we are going to approach the idea of the cyclical approach itself. So the idea that crisis, rapid changes, and disruptions are unforeseeable, even in a highly polarized and contested strategic competition, is absolutely misleading. These events, with long-term impacts on societies, economies, policy developments, social dynamics, and the lives of millions of individuals, are instead just strategic surprises, but the kind of that can be anticipated, not anticipated, with the right approach and the right tools available for policymakers and leaders. So the reality is that those individuals in political, military, and economic position of responsibility often ignore any kind of warning signals because of traditional reactive decision-making posture, which I think characterizes big organizations and institutions. And here I include, first and foremost, NATO, of course. And my point here is that the more blurry, uncertain, and unpredictable the strategic environment appears, the more the importance of strategic anticipatory thinking shouldn't be underestimated. Conversely, the reality is that often leadership underrates the limitation of short-term visions and the reactive posture, refraining as a consequence from examining any kind or any proposal for future scenarios and potential options. And so the need for more diverse perspective in consultative and decision-making processes is a pressing issue, and also a responsibility for actual leadership. No matter how informed they are, but different viewpoints are needed, are essential to navigate and to understand and to perceive different and to appreciate different perspectives about the complexities of global crisis. Other perspectives are not just beneficial but necessary, as I said before, to ensure comprehensive and effective decision making, and in particular, a strategic anticipatory thinking approach. So the more diverse opinions are around the table, the more the strategic anticipatory thinking is stimulated, in particular within leaderships. Decision makers must be able to anticipate and be used to think in terms of radically different future scenarios through which they can adopt creative decision to inform policy, strategy, and finally capability development. And they need to assess comparatively the strategic environment or the ability, the capabilities, strength, and weaknesses of any competitor they are dealing with. And this is critical to compete successfully and to prevail in strategic confrontation. And now we have what I call the beautiful slide. So it's the way how I think we should start understanding the cyclical and adaptive interaction between the four pillars. Approaching strategic uncertainties, asymmetries, and weaknesses requires creating a flexible, adaptive cycle within which the anticipatory disciplines support decision makers in informing policy planning and capability development processes. The modern hyperspeed evolving, increasingly volatile, uncertain, and multipolar strategic environment requires then the ability to design, refine, reframe, and continuously adjust and adapt policies, strategies, and capabilities. This is the cyclical approach. This approach allows an organization to fortify its strategic posture on its own strengths, and to mitigate weaknesses, preserving meanwhile the adaptability and the organizational agility to navigate uncertain environmental conditions. So here I have a very important point. The transition from relying exclusively on a linear, mathematical, statistical forecasting based on historical data to strategic anticipatory thinking, which involves considering multiple scenarios, infinite futures, options, strategic options, and examining medium long-term time horizons is absolutely crucial. And equally, an integrated all-domain, red-blue, so continuous work of comparative net assessment to distinguish drivers of strengths, vulnerabilities, asymmetries, and risks is fundamental to thoroughly understand the complexity of present and where we will position our organization in the future having a time frame of 10, 15, or 20 years in front of us. And these two conceptual shifts in thinking models necessitate a mindset transformation for leadership and staff that, in my view, should start from academia, universities, and so I think we are in the right place here. And finally, the outcome of this cyclical process will facilitate effective and comprehensive policy planning and strategy development, supporting at the end of the process, the definition of critical high-hand capabilities to achieve strategic dominance. So I would say, well, in my view, this approach equips organizations to think and operate proactively and non-reactively, exploiting asymmetries, mitigating weaknesses and risks, and in a way transforming strategic uncertainty into a competitive advantage. Because if you assess, if you see an uncertainty or if you perceive an uncertainty, and then you apply in a different or maybe creative or out-of-the-box thinking way a different policy, you probably have the option or the opportunity to create a competitive advantage vis-a-vis any strategic competitor. And to stimulate our discussion, our conversation, I have identified just a couple of strategic questions. Regarding the issue to link anticipatory disciplines and strategic planning, I would say that foresight and comparative net assessment must be integral to the policy-making process to create such a permanent link between anticipatory thinking and strategic planning. And this can be achieved by integrating foresight and comparative assessment methodologies within the strategic framework, strategic planning, or decision-making and strategic planning framework of any organizational decision-making procedure and process. And these two disciplines must be perceived as contributing elements to improving the strategic anticipatory capacity of a national government, an international organization, or a corporation. To do so, these two disciplines need to preserve the characteristics of being conceptually disruptive and out-of-the-box thinking within the organization itself. And as a final thought, I would say that operationalizing strategic foresight and comparative assessment within a planning process will create a strong, flexible organization capable of dealing with uncertainties and strategic challenges in a very contested and rapidly changing environment. And with regard to the second strategic question, I think that no one can predict what will look like, what we will look like as an organization, state, or society 20 years from now. However, to depict futures and draw potential future trajectories among the infinite trajectories that we know are from present to futures, there is an existential need to expand the foresight mindset among staff members and leaders at any level, as we said before. And only decision makers cognizant and supportive of strategic forward thinking can facilitate, enhance this shift in perspective and decision-making culture. I would arrive to conclusions by saying some opinions and some concepts on strategic foresight and comparative net assessment as disciplines developed in parallel. And I would reinforce the idea of the linkages between these two disciplines. Strategic foresight helps to identify and anticipate future trends, weak signals, and risks, helping, meanwhile, to envisage opportunities. Uncertainty and unpredictability are inherent characteristics in geostrategic confrontation and involve military, political, economic, and technological domains. And foresight supports overall a comprehensive vision of the future in these terms. On the other side, net assessment compares the relative strengths and weaknesses of an organization in terms of military, economic, and political capacities, and go against the same capacities and capabilities of any competitor. Therefore, understanding own strengths and those of our adversaries is crucial to start formulating effective strategic options and then policies and strategies in a confrontation. So if developed in parallel with the continuous sharing of information and outcomes, foresight creates the foundation for net assessment by identifying trends potentially evolving into threats that necessitate leadership attention and comparative assessment. And that exchange informs policy planning by defining future challenges and strategic options. And through such integration, the entire decision-making process ensures that policy are forward-looking, based on realistic assessments, and aimed at building appropriate capabilities. I'm trying to be a bit provocative here by saying that with strategic foresight, policies can avoid being reactive because focusing only on immediate threats. And without net assessment, policies may be based on misjudgments about capabilities. So the complexity of modern confrontation, whether involving great power rivalries, hybrid warfare, or non-state actors, require a new comprehensive approach that anticipates future threats, realistically assess current positions and current situations, effectively plans, and build the capabilities which are necessary to succeed. I'd like to offer you a couple of takeaways. Formalizing a strategic analysis and foresight capability in any organizational decision-making executive branch at the highest political, military, or business decision-making level is essential. It is imperative because such an element needs to be situated where crucial decisions are made to support an integrated across organization approach to formulating security and defense policies, as well economic policies, defining strategies, and implementing actions across all domains. The aim is to address future risks, threats, challenges, and opportunities in a multipolar and multi-domain strategic landscape. Our organization will be positioned in the next 15 or 20 years from now depends on the decision maker's ability to adopt visionary decisions that will build a precise future among the infinite ones. And moreover, we understand that we face opponents, adversaries, and rivals in confrontation, competition, race, right? So I envisage, and I'm pursuing this line of research with some European colleagues in this months, I envisage a need for a strategic, anticipatory, foresight-informed decision-making process supported by comparative net assessment, thinking about multiple futures and moving forward toward a long-term temporal horizon, thus articulating implications and consequences for policy and strategy developments. And the final thought is about integrating strategic, anticipatory, and comparative assessment thinking. This integration has the potential to be decisive. It could become a powerful tool that will empower complex organizations to navigate the rapidly changing, tumultuous and multipolar geopolitical landscape, addressing future risks and opportunities by identifying comparatively asymmetries and strategic imbalances, where the instruments of power of a nation, in this case, or an international organization like NATO, could be applied to protect the center of gravity and to attack the center of gravity of any competitor or adversary. And I'd like to leave you with an excerpt from Tyson Ziegler, who says, "We are turning our fear of change into a source of inspiration and creativity." And I think that we need a spark of optimism during these uncertain times. So I would stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and of course I'm looking forward to hearing your question, comments, or maybe to be engaged in a conversation. And I will end my screen sharing. Thank you.
Great. Yep. Thank you, General Greco. That was a very interesting talk, and I'll tell you, I jotted down probably 1,000 questions, but it's funny because the first one that showed up in the Q&A block was on my list as well. The audience member quotes Winston Churchill, and he says there's only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that's fighting without them. In your experience at NATO, is there a way for a 32-country consensus-oriented alliance that seems at this point in time almost moribund in its bureaucratic procedures and processes, as you've highlighted? Is there what kinds of things will need to happen for NATO to get into the business of anticipatory foresight and strategic assessment at the level you're talking about? Because clearly you're venting here a little bit, in my estimation, from your experiences in the NATO staff at some level, and want to see some changes there as well.
Well, we start with a very tough one. I mean, it's a great question, because it's the essence of my is the essence and the reason why I decided to talk about this kind of integration. The point within NATO is that there is no way to change the way how NATO proceed along the decision-making process. So the consensus based the consensus-based decision-making process is untouchable. So the point here is that from a political perspective, because then you need to analyze the political perspective, the military perspective, and the way how both domains interact to get the integration. Because the point to get the integration is that you need to put together the political side of the house, the military side of the house around the table, and they need to decide that, yes, they need to integrate. Because NATO, at any level, we're talking about NATO HQ in Brussels, which is political military, but then even at the strategic level, either in Mons, very close to Brussels, or in ACT, Norfolk, they have capabilities to do, of course, strategic foresight and net assessment, as well as policy planning and capability development. The problem is that they are working as stovepipes, and there is no entities or authorities or proper stage where this integration could be effectively developed. So here you have my point. There is the extant crucial necessity to integrate, but on the other side, you have the organizational difficulty to start thinking in terms of integration. I have an example for you. In Brussels, so we are talking about NATO HQ, there is no strategic foresight capability. So at the political military level, there is no official elements who perform strategic foresight, while they have net assessment. Instead, the strategic foresight capability is allocated a level below in ACT, Allied Command for Transformation, which deals with war fighting and warfare. But it is a strategic military command. So you miss the political allure and the political blessing on any document you produce as strategic foresight document itself.
Yeah, and you missed the perspective. You missed the perspective. This is interesting because while you're talking, I thought, wow, that's stunning. But it also explains why in 2014, the entirety of NATO was caught flat-footed when Russia's aggression in Ukraine, presented us a fait accompli. And we had, like I said, we as an alliance were going, because we didn't have the foresight to see any of that coming, because we didn't have the political, the military interface. That same problem exists at the national level in the U.S. as well, by the way. That whole civil military discussion that Clausewitz articulates very clearly never happens in America. It doesn't happen like the way it should anyway. So that's a really interesting point. I like it a lot. Here's a question I have for you, though, because strategic foresight, obviously, all predictions are wrong in some fashion, So we're gonna be wrong. But what you mentioned at one point in time in your talk, 2050 as some sort of time horizon that's not too far away. In this era of rapid change, both in the environment with regards to technology and climate and all sorts of other social issues that are actually reshaping the environment that we're talking about. What's a reasonable time horizon that we should be looking at? How far is strategic foresight really good for in the contemporary age?
This is an impossible question. This is what
I'm known for that, actually. Those are the kind I ask most times.
No, but I really appreciate it because if you are a strategic foresight practitioner, then you look at futures, plural, and the number is infinite. So you don't have any issue in defining your time horizon in terms of 20, 30, 40 years. The point that you need to make and the element that you have and the characteristic and the ability that you need to develop is your ability to think completely outside from present environment. You need to, in a way, position yourself outside of the world, and you need to think about that world with your knowledge and, in a way, abstracting yourself, saying, okay, in 30 years, we will be very far in the space, very far out of space. Yes, how, why, how can we develop technologies, what we would need, how can I imagine the future for that specific company in 2050. And then once I have decided that that future among the infinite ones is the most interesting for a leadership or for a decision maker, then you do the backcasting to present, and you try to understand and to identify in your backcasting line. And this is the reason why we call it future trajectories, because it's an imaginary line that starting in present and flies into the futures until you decided that the point in the future is good enough for you to imagine your scenario or your big net or your imagine of future. And so you do backcasting, and then you try to understand which points are crucial, essential along that imaginary line that need decisions. And therefore you build other conditions for your leadership to try to understand, okay, we need to think about strategic options, decision to make now, because we want to be there in 20 years. I hope that I have at least contributed to answer your question, Jeff.
You have contributed. And clearly it is an important question, because you have to, I mean, you have to kind of know, at least have put something around where you're going. Of the infinite futures, it's difficult to pick one. How do you pick one? Because you talk about, so we got infinite futures up to 2050. We know one where we kind of think, well, the world will look pretty cool if this is the way it looked like. How do we make the world look this way? Aren't there limits on our ability to control outcomes between now and that desired future that are going to stand in our way of actually executing? And how do we set ourselves up for success in those situations?
This is another great question, because this is a question that I would pose to leadership. I mean, let's imagine that I'm working for you and you are the leader, and you told me, okay, I need to think about my organization in 20 years. Fine. I will try to develop different images of future for your organization, and I will depict you, and we will be interacting on how build those futures, and I will try to interview and to challenge you and to stimulate you in terms of strategic anticipatory thinking. I'd like to extract from your imagination how do you see, or how you would see your organization in 20 years. And then once I have 3, 4, 10, whatever images of future, I will backcast you as a leader from future to present, and I will pose you the question that you posed me. I will ask you, sir, you now need to think about what is the not the best, but what is the future that you like the most for your organization? And in this way, you help the leader to filter those futures or those images which are not useful, or which that are very dangerous for the organization. And this is a sort of strategic filtering of decisions that the leadership is taking or is building at present. Does it make sense?
It does. I get it. I understand it. I've actually taught some of this material in a previous life, but there's one of the issues that I think that NATO and military units in general have, and you and I have both spent plenty of our adult life in uniform, so we kind of know that. But there's a certain, there's a need for diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, diversity of perspectives, which is probably the single biggest reason why we asked you to talk tonight, is just get that perspective, to get a wholly diverse perspective, a
Sure.
European one instead of our myopic American one that we oftentimes suffer from. But diversity of perspectives is critically important, and yet the bureaucracy and leadership oftentimes drives non-divergent thinking as a function of the incentive structures, right? That's how big bureaucracies are made. They're not made to accommodate divergent thinkers. They're not, and this is a complaint you hear across any big organization, not just the militaries. So do you see plausible ways, especially a big bureaucracy like NATO or a big bureaucracy like the U.S. Department of Defense or any other defense ministry, in increasing the amount of perspectives? And you don't need multiple perspectives at every level, right? It's that anticipatory foresight piece that actually requires the most divergent thinkers. Beyond that, the requirement for divergent thinking goes down just a little bit as you step through the cycle, right? Am I wrong with understanding it that way, you think?
Absolutely, that's
Yeah.
correct.
So how do we encourage an environment where divergent thinking and diverse perspectives are not only encouraged, but are sought after?
This is the toughest one. I do have to admit.
Wow.
But you know
Getting
what?
better.
No,
I'm just getting warmed up, sir. I'm just getting.
no, that's great. I mean, and this is according my experience, according to my
Yeah,
experience at NATO.
good.
I would put, and this is also the solution that I can offer to you. You have to work under two different lines.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is to spread, to develop the mindset and the culture of strategic foresight and comparative net assessment. And initially, you have to build two different categories of staff: the foresight practitioners and the comparative and the specialist in comparative assessment. And this is, let's say, the manpower solution from the basis. And
Mm-hmm.
then you need to build the capabilities, net assessment and foresight, and you need to allocate them at the highest level possible. There is no other solution for that. If you put strategic foresight or net assessment within the staff or the strategic level or worse at the operational level, you will miss the essence of integrating both disciplines, and more, you miss the idea that diversity and divergent thinking and out of the box thinking is helping the organization to find proper solutions. So just to recap, put the capabilities, net assessment and foresight immediately under the boss. So the private office of the Secretary General or the White House executive branch, this is the level. And then you need to build people capable to understand. And this is the reason why I'm so happy to have the opportunity to share my thoughts with you guys at ASU. And then you need to build different people thinking in a very divergent and unconventional way. And so you have two powers, two forces. One force is growing from the basis, the other one is coming from the top. And therefore, you consolidate the idea that you will be thinking in a very different way.
That was a good explanation, because actually I took a bunch of notes during your talk, and one of them was this idea that there's so many paradoxes you discussed. One of the paradoxes is this idea of having allies, and then the kind of the almost crippling, decision-making processes that sometimes come along with that. There's a requirement for diversity, but the bureaucracy and leadership kind of put a pressure on that. So there's, but in addition to that, the skill sets required to execute well each of the four pillars are actually different skill sets, right? They're different sorts of approaches to things. Some are a little bit more mechanistic or industrial aged almost in the planning piece of it, but then this whole open idea, divergent future forecasting kind of thing is a wholly different mindset. So it is become a personnel, almost an HR nightmare, because now you're managing all these different streams of people.
Yes, but you need to prepare people to
Yeah.
think differently. They don't need people capable to think holistically and being experts in policy planning, capability
Yeah.
development, foresight, net assessment, operational planning, intelligence analysis. You need people capable to, particularly for anticipatory thinking disciplines, you need people experienced enough to think differently. And another thing, but this is more a practical suggestion, capabilities that deals with net assessment and foresight, they need to be protected from the business routine. They
Right.
need to stay far from the daily business. They need to have the liberty, the freedom to think about anything, because between 10, 20 very bad ideas, then you will find the worst, which will be exactly the solution for a problem that is projecting into future in 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated and complex problem, I see, but this is the reality also.
Yeah, and actually, we spend a bunch of time in my former job distinguishing between the term complexity and complicated. Complicated is kind of more mechanistic. You can trace the cause and effect in something that's complicated, even no matter how hard it is. A car is a complicated machinery because we know how every part of it works. The human brain is a complex machine because we don't really understand how it completely works. And that complexity piece creates different problem sets for us, which you've highlighted tonight in spades, quite frankly, because you have highlighted the fact in this globalized world, it's basically kind of all connected, and you can't just have the specialist doing a linear problem solving, right? That's not
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's impossible. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Well, great. I think we're at an hour. General, I appreciate your time. It was really good. I apologize if my questions were a little bit pointed, but this is a topic in which I'm pretty well engaged in. I have in my professional career, in my academic one. So I appreciate your sticking with me and not backing off.
It was awesome, absolutely a great honor and a pleasure to talk to you, Jeff, and
Well,
to
we
your.
hope to have you. We hope to have you back at some point. We'll have some more conversations in the future. I'm sure. I
Absolutely.
appreciate your time. I appreciate the attendance for those who came this evening, and we hope to see you more at some future events like this. Thanks again, everybody, and have a nice night. Thank you, General.